Hi, I'm David Shipler.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Two reporters. Start now. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Danny. How you doing?
Great, thank you. Two quick questions, please. Number one, do you use a cell phone?
Am I living in the 21st century, you mean? Yeah, I use it. I mean, I'm addicted to it. Yes, I love it. I love it and hate it at the same time because I can never really retreat from the world.
Second question, have you ever called a company and they say something like, this conversation may be recorded for...
Yes, it's not very reassuring, but that's the way it goes. It's for service purposes, right? For quality control.
Right.
Yeah.
So they say, well, pretty much all of us would answer the questions the same way, I think. And that's exactly why we really need to listen to our guest today. Nathan Wessler is a lawyer with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. He helps run their speech, privacy, and technology project out of New York. He's argued major cases before the Supreme Court.
And Nate and his colleagues are concerned that high-tech surveillance systems are watching us as we go about our daily lives. They're watching us a lot more than you might think. For starters, we talked with him in our last episode about how companies and the government are using facial recognition systems, kind of like everywhere, on your cell phones, at some airports, on surveillance cameras in businesses.
And Nate told us how ordinary, innocent people have been getting in trouble because some of those facial recognition systems messed up. The computer thought they were somebody else. And some of those innocent people went to jail.
And today, Nate joins us again to warn us about other kinds of surveillance technologies that can track where we're going and what we're doing, even though we might not know it.
So, Nate, let's start with the beloved possession that nobody can do without, even Dave, your cell phone.
That's right. Each of us carries one of these little boxes in our pocket or our handbag that is tremendously useful communication device, entertainment device, how many countless apps are on our phones. Lots of good reasons that we carry these things. And in fact, we kind of have to, right, for work, for family, for emergencies. But it turns out these are really not just powerful computers. They're location beacons. They're tracking devices. And there are several ways in which our cell phones generate incredibly voluminous and detailed records of where we have been over time. And those records end up lodged with a whole bunch of different companies. Our cell phone service provider, AT&T or T-Mobile, depending on the settings on your phone, Google, maybe some of the other companies that you use software from. But then also many of the apps on many people's phones are constantly collecting location data and then reselling it for profit to this shadowy gray market of location data brokers and aggregators who then resell it to private companies and to law enforcement. And so there are these numerous humongous databases of people's location records sitting out there for use by the police and for use by private companies in ways that very few people understand or expect.
Sometimes I get an app that says, is it okay if we use your location? And I always try to say no. Or sometimes I say, well, only when I'm using the app. So you're saying this location data has been bought already, probably by some private company I've never heard of, who is now reselling it to other companies I may not have heard of?
That's exactly right for many of these apps. Now, Apple and Google have done recently a better job of giving people the ability to turn off location access for some of these apps or all of these apps. I have an iPhone. I keep location services turned off globally on my phone. So there are things that we can do. But for apps that have access to that location information, many of them are monetizing our location history and selling it out into this marketplace. It always bears remembering that free apps are never free. They're making money somehow. There's some number of apps that we pay for in the Apple App Store or the Google equivalent, but most of them people just download for free. But these are companies that are trying to make a buck. And so they're going to make a buck through advertising, but they're also going to make a buck by monetizing every last piece of data about you that they possibly can. And location information is probably the most lucrative because there are all kinds of companies that want to be able to target ads. How often are people going past this corner? So what kind of advertising could be there? What kind of stores could be there? People who came to this Target, what store did they come from? What neighborhood did they come from? So it's very valuable information. And there's a whole ecosystem of companies set up to buy that data from the apps on our phones often, almost always, without us having any idea it is happening.
But Nate, even if you turn off the location data on your phone, doesn't your phone ping cell towers all the time? And isn't it possible for the communications company to locate you at least in some vicinity because of that, even if you have your location data turned off?
That's exactly right. So turning off location services on your phone denies apps access to the GPS chip on the phone, but it does not deny your cell phone service provider, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, et cetera, from knowing where your phone is, because your phone has to talk to cell towers to get service. And every time your phone receives a phone call or sends or receives a text message or makes a data connection, you're downloading a weather update, you're watching a YouTube video, whatever it is, there's a record logged at the phone company of which cell tower your phone was talking to and which directional antenna of that tower you were talking to. And in a densely populated area, a city or a dense suburb, there are a lot of towers to handle all the bandwidth. And so the coverage area for each one of those antennas is pretty small. So you often can, the phone company often can infer pretty precisely where somebody is at any given moment, and certainly can track people across time.
In a rural area, would it be less precise where you might just be pinging one cell tower?
Yes, in a rural area, it might be that there's one cell tower every 10 miles because if it's a relatively flat area without obstructions, the cell phone signals can go pretty far, and there's just not enough people that you need more towers to handle the bandwidth. So the locational precision can vary over space and time. Okay,
so I guess there it might mean that people tracking you could make mistakes.
Mistakes are totally possible, and we know they've happened.
Give us an example of why we should worry about our location data being all over the place.
I think that there are a bunch of reasons we should worry. One reason is that easy accessibility of our location data to the police can ensnare us in investigations and make us the suspects for things we had nothing to do with.
But why would that happen to an average person, realistically?
Because there are lots of reasons why you might be near the scene of a crime around the time of a crime, but have had nothing to do with it. And a lot of this location information is quite precise, but it's not truly pinpoint precise, right? There are margins of error. GPS data might be accurate to several meters, but it might be accurate to, 100 yards or more, depending on where the satellites are and what's obstructing them.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, one of the techniques that police are increasingly using are getting search warrants directed at Google for what they call geofences. So Google is sitting on this huge database of GPS information about where users of its Android operating system and of its other apps, Google Maps, et cetera, are at any given time, right? They hold on to that information unless you go into your settings and deny them access. And they are able, at police request with a proper warrant, or what they regard as a proper warrant, we disagree that these warrants are ever proper, they are able to do a search to say, here are all of the phones that were in a particular geographic area in a particular time frame around the time and location of a crime. Police have been making lots of these requests. In some investigations, it has probably led to an arrest of somebody who actually committed the crime. But we know there have been false trails that resulted in people's false arrests too. The New York Times a couple of years ago reported on the case of a man in Arizona who was arrested for a murder, held in jail for 7 days before it turned out that, and police realized that actually he wasn't the guy. It's just that his Google account indicated that some device that was logged into his account had been in the vicinity of the area of this homicide around the time of the homicide. And police gave too much credence to that evidence without enough other investigative work and arrested him for a homicide he had absolutely nothing to do with. And it really turned his life upside down. I mean, he lost his car, he lost his job, he was in jail for a week. That's pretty bad.
And just in case some people are thinking, oh, that's extreme, I'd never be put in jail for something like that. I want to talk for a moment about the case in Gainesville, Florida that I read about. A couple of years ago, a young man discovered that he's become the lead suspect in a burglary. Police think he's the one who stole jewelry from an elderly woman's house. Why? Because police got geolocation data from Google, and it turns out that the young man had been riding his bicycle a number of times around the woman's house and doing loops. Why? Well, photos show that he's a little bit overweight, and he was working out riding his bike. he ended up getting cleared, but only after his parents spent thousands of dollars getting a good lawyer. It turned out he wasn't involved in the burglary at all. He just happened to be near the victim's house.
It's interesting, Danny, because there are similar examples of the COVID tracking apps where people have, get notified that they've been in the proximity of somebody who then tested positive for COVID. It turned out the person was kind of riding by on a bus or something. So it's like there are all kinds of errors that are possible.
But, there are also lots of other ways that people can experience harm and stigma from this kind of data leaking out from their control, even short of a false arrest. In this marketplace of location data that is scraped off of the apps running on many of our phones, these databases are sometimes able to say, which app somebody was using that generated which location points. And we know of examples of people being outed as gay based on the fact that they were using Grindr and went to particular locations, right? There was a...
Yeah, wait, let me just say here.
Being outed by, wow.
Grindr, Dave, we're old.
Yeah,
So Grindr, Grindr, is the most popular, or one of the most popular apps for dating and hookups, especially for gay people. Right, Nate?
That's right. And there was a conservative Catholic blog, effectively, that bought access to a bunch of this location data, including data that came from people running Grindr on their phones, and was able to figure out, so that this location data is purportedly anonymized, right? People's names aren't associated with these location points in these databases. Instead, the phones are assigned these numerical identifiers. But it turns out that it's trivially easy to identify somebody by just tracking their phone backward and forward and figure out where they start their day and where they end it, figure out where their house is. You look at a property record, you know who they are, or where they go to work. So these bloggers got this data and were able to find a Grindr user who spent a whole lot of time at a Catholic parish house.
Let me just say that this supposed news site, this blog, is called Pillar, and respected journalism groups have sharply criticized them for doing shoddy and sensationalist reporting.
And they bought this data. They identified a Catholic priest who they alleged was having same-sex relationships, and they outed him in public, and he lost his parish. It is way beyond me to make judgments about what a particular religion should do in its decisions about its clergy, but the power of somebody to deduce somebody's sexual activities based on location data that they buy that leaked off of their phone is just so chilling. That is just one drop in the bucket of the kinds of information about us that can be deduced from this information and monetized and sold and resold and bought by anyone who wants to. We know, for example, that one of the major Muslim prayer apps that people around the world use was collecting location information, which is, it's information that the app had a reason to use for some purposes, right? To know where you are and be able to accurately give someone prayer times, 5 times a day, depends what time zone you're in, where in the time zone, when sunset is. But it was then monetizing that information, reselling it, and ended up being bought by the U.S. federal government, by the military.
For what purpose would the military buy this?
Well, we don't know exactly, but so this is an app being used both by Americans and by people overseas, and the U.S. military is just ending wars in Muslim countries. Sure is an attractive target to the government to be able to track large numbers of Muslims using an app that is reliably on their phones. And that is just, it's just beyond disturbing.
Do you think they're doing it inside the U.S.? I mean, if you look at Afghanistan or Iraq, I mean, the countries are all Muslims pretty much. Wouldn't seem, very useful in those countries, but it does raise the question of whether it's being used inside the U.S.
Well, the government clearly had access to that data. They were buying a tranche of data. Now, we don't know whether the U.S. military did anything with the Americans' data. We certainly know that law enforcement and the government in the U.S. has targeted Muslims and members of other religious minorities for surveillance. You'll, of course, remember the NYPD Muslim surveillance unit in the years after 9/11 that was using other technologies, including automatic license plate reader technology, to record records of everybody who was parked near mosques in certain parts of New York City. Had they had access at that time to this technology to just download a list of every phone that was near a mosque and then track people backward and forward, there would have been room for even more pernicious profiling of people as to whom there was no actual suspicion of wrongdoing, just an association and a religious profile that brought them under suspicion.
So I just want to wrap my mind around this. Because there's two very complicated worlds that are using our geolocation information. There's the government agencies, whether it's Homeland Security or the FBI, I suppose, or local police. There are now court cases that say, no, you cannot just get this location data from the phone companies whenever you want, right? You have to have a warrant. But then there's this whole other world of private companies getting huge amounts of geolocation data about us. And you're saying that they are selling this to law enforcement, getting around the court decisions, and they're also selling it to other private companies, right?
Yeah, and it's a huge problem. Now, the cell phone companies are barred by federal law from reselling your location data for profit without your consent. Congress realized that was a problem in the 90s as part of the Federal Telecommunications Act. But there's no equivalent law for the GPS information generated through apps on our phones that's resold.
So just to be clear, as I understand it, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act currently prohibits communications companies, AT&T, T-Mobile, and so forth, from disclosing to government your locations without a court order, but it does not prohibit private brokers, so to speak, that the middlemen, the companies that buy the location data, from disclosing to government if government pays them to get the information. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's a law that dates to 1986. Congress was doing its level best in the mid-'80s to figure out what technology looked like and how to regulate it. But of course, there were no smartphones or apps, and there was no, middleman market reselling this stuff. So some apps are regulated by that federal privacy law and are prohibited themselves from selling people's location data to the government. But they seem to be of the opinion that they are able to clean their hands by selling it to a private buyer who then repackages it and resells it to some aggregator or broker who then sells it to the government. And it's a major problem for our privacy vis-a-vis companies, but it's also a major problem for our privacy vis-a-vis government, because police at the federal level and increasingly at the state and local level are starting to realize that they can bypass the Fourth Amendment by ponying up some money for this data instead of going to a judge and getting a search warrant. There's a bipartisan bill called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act, whose intent is to close what law enforcement regards as a loophole, to make clear that, for location information and other similarly sensitive information that would require a warrant if police went to a company and tried to just compel them with a piece of paper to turn it over, then police need a warrant also if they want to buy it.
But that's a proposal, not a law.
That's right. It's a proposal. It has not had a hearing yet this year. The potential for abuse is really great. There's such a rich picture of people's lives in this data. And it's a picture that does not obviously just reveal when criminal suspects were near the scenes of crimes. It reveals where every one of us was all the time, whether that's at an abortion clinic or at a doctor's office or at a lover's house or anything else.
What other federal agencies buy this location data? You mentioned the U.S. military, the IRS also.
Why does the IRS buy this data?
The IRS had a contract at one point with one of these companies. I don't know what they were investigating in particular. You want to think of an example of an agency that enjoys the least trust across the political spectrum to package people's information and investigate them, probably the IRS. We have a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit right now pending against the Department of Homeland Security, including its components, ICE and CBP, as well as the Coast Guard and the Secret Service, to try to figure out the extent of their use of this data and their contracts. We know that they're paying a lot of money to some companies to buy access to this data. So it's military, it's intelligence agencies, it's federal law enforcement, it's border authorities. It's really all over the place.
And just a reminder for all of you, we are talking with Nathan Wessler of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. He helps run their privacy and technology project.
And I wonder, Nate, whether coordination among the various surveillance methods can reduce errors or lead to more persecution or surveillance. For example, China has a system they call one person, one file, which is designed to combine information from various methods. And I guess in the United States, where we're talking about both geolocation via cell phones and facial recognition, and you say to what extent does the coordination exist between facial recognition and geolocation in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, huge amounts of money are being invested at the federal, state, and local level into combining all kinds of data streams that include sensitive and personal information about our activities and our identities. And increasingly, police are knitting them together to paint, ever more detailed pictures of our lives. There's a case that we litigated in federal court in Baltimore recently that resulted in a very strong opinion from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Baltimore, a few years ago, contracted with a company called Persistent Surveillance Solutions to send single-engine Cessna spy planes up above the city that were equipped with these humongously powerful cameras on their underbellies, gigapixel cameras that had wide-angle lenses that took one photo a second. The photo covered most of the city at once, and it was such high resolution that each of these photos, one per second, so effectively a video over time, could be zoomed in on any place to pick up individual pedestrians walking down streets and individual cars. And the whole point was to amass a pervasive record of the movements of every Baltimore resident over time, so that if a crime occurred that police were then investigating later, they could basically wind back the clock and try to figure out who was walking toward that crime scene before and left after, and where did they come from and where did they go to?
Because then they could knit that together with footage from thousands of cameras around the city.
Exactly right. Thousands of surveillance cameras, thousands of automated license plate readers. These are cameras that snap a photo of every license plate that goes by, turn it into machine-readable text, and geotag it and put it in a big database. So now it's a location database of cars' movements. And what the U.S. Court of Appeals said is that this pervasive aerial surveillance program violates the Fourth Amendment. It's a general search, an overbroad search, tracking every resident of Baltimore all the time. And part of what they talked about was a response to the city's argument, where the city said, well, look, this only goes during daylight hours, and it's only, people basically appear as dots, right? You can't see their face, right? It's a lot of police work to figure out who they are and where they went.
So why bother then?
Right. Well, exactly. Right. But why bother? And that's part of what the court said. Like, clearly you thought this was worth putting planes up in the air for 6 months to test this thing. But the court also said, no, that's like such a facile explanation of what you're doing, because you are knitting it together, both this aerial surveillance footage with the automated license plate reader data, with surveillance cameras on street corners, and with all kinds of other data sources. And through the combination of all of those, there's a real potential to pervasively track people without any individualized suspicion at the time, without a warrant, and that is just a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights.
The court ordered Baltimore not to go ahead with that system because the ACLU was around to sue. But the ACLU can't be everywhere all the time, all across the United States.
The courts are way behind the technology. I want to read something from a case that's absolutely spot on in this discussion. It's from an opinion by the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in a case called United States of America versus Antoine Jones, who was a suspected drug dealer. And on his vehicle, the police placed a GPS tracking device, which provided his location 24 hours a day for 4 weeks. So here's what the court ruled. And by the way, their ruling requiring the police to get a warrant to do this was upheld by the Supreme Court. Here's what the court says. It really was a good statement of the problem here. It is one thing for a passerby to observe or even to follow someone during a single journey as he goes to the market or returns home from work, the court said. It is another thing entirely for that stranger to pick up the scent again the next day and the day after that, week in and week out, dogging his prey until he has identified all the places, people, amusements, and chores that make up that person's hitherto private routine. A person who knows all of another's travels, they wrote, can deduce whether he is a weekly churchgoer, a heavy drinker, a regular at the gym, an unfaithful husband, an outpatient receiving medical treatment, an associate of particular individuals or political groups, and not just one such fact about a person, but all such facts. That's the mosaic theory, what intelligence people call the mosaic theory, taking little bits and pieces and putting them all together to make a whole. That was me talking about the mosaic theory. But that.
Okay, so we've just been talking about how companies and law enforcement can track our every move through geolocation. Last episode, we talked with you about facial recognition systems. Let's turn now to another technology that's really starting to take off.
Yeah, this is voice recognition. Some brokerage firms will use it to identify you on the phone if you want to make a trade or something.
Yeah, in fact, recently I was using a banking app, and it said, thank you for using voice print or whatever it was called. You don't have to log in. And I thought, oh, thank goodness I don't have to look up my password, which I never remember. They were using my voice.
Is that a concern too? I mean, that's that seems like something pretty close to facial recognition.
I think we should worry about it. I think, to me, face recognition technology is the most dangerous and powerful of the biometric collection technologies.
Face recognition, you said.
Face recognition. But voice recognition is also a growing sector and is being used more. It's one of a number of biometrics that companies are figuring out how to use, and the government is figuring out how to use to identify and track people. It includes other biometrics like, iris or retina prints, of course, fingerprints and palm prints, gait recognition, right? It turns out that by and large, people's pattern of our walking,
really?
Our gait.
Oh my gosh.
Machine learning systems have been trained to uniquely identify people based on the cadence and angle and stutter of their step in very precise ways.
Good heavens.
Part of what is troubling about voice recognition and all these others is the way that they can be used to identify people remotely. Right now, we are used to thinking about fingerprints as a biometric, right? Uniquely identifying. Now, not perfectly so. There's a large literature about how fingerprints are actually less reliably uniquely identifying than we kind of think about them, having watched these crime shows. But they're often pretty good. But they, until recently, required, you to actually put your finger on a terminal or press it into ink and onto a pad, right, to have your fingerprint collected.
Or according to movies, you could cut off somebody's finger if you're an evil person.
And get into a secure area, right?
Right.
Yes.
The thing that is troubling and opens the potential and reality for abuse for many of these other biometrics is that they can be collected remotely. Your voice goes out into the ether, and with a microphone close enough to you, it can be recorded. Gait recognition or face recognition just requires a camera that can see you. Researchers have developed cameras that can do iris or retina iris scans at 40 feet. And in fact, the FBI has invested in technology from a startup that purports to be able to read your fingerprints off of sufficiently high resolution social media photos where your hand is visible.
Boy.
And so, this, whether it's voice recognition or any of these other technologies, creates a situation where you have companies sitting on a database of people's immutable biometric identifiers, right? These are derived from our features that we can't change. Think about how troublesome it is when you get a notice from your bank that somebody was able to spoof your debit card and withdrew $2,000 in another state. But you can get a new debit card, you get a new number, you can even get a new social security number if you need to. It's a pain, it takes a while, but it's possible. You cannot get a new voice, you cannot get a new face, you cannot get a new iris or retina. And so there's a real danger that companies sitting on these huge databases of our unique biometric identifiers can be hacked or leak that information, identity theft, or can track us in ways that we never expected when we first shared them.
And I want to get back to voice recognition for a minute. A few years ago, I did a story about the Internet of Things. All these smart devices that we have in our homes now that collect information about us, like smart refrigerators that keep track of what we eat, smart televisions that keep track of what kind of programs we watch, even smart blankets that keep track of our heart rates and sleep cycles, and even our sexual habits, perhaps. And one of the issues I wrote about was Kayla, the talking doll. This was a doll for kids. It had a voice recognition system built into it. So a kid could say, "Hi, Kayla," and the doll would say, "What's your name?" "My name is Jane." And then the kid could say, "Hey, Kayla, tell me about unicorns." And then the voice recognition system turned the voice into print. It searched the internet, and then the doll would talk back to the kid about unicorns from the internet. Well, it turns out your colleagues at the Electronic Frontier Foundation did terrific reporting about this. It turned out that the company that designed the software that handled the speech recognition was storing voice prints from hundreds of millions of people around the world, including kids talking to Kayla. apparently. Now, if you were a parent or a teenager, whatever, who walked into the room while the kid was talking to Kayla, your voice would be stored too. So this company was amassing hundreds of millions of voice prints that it was selling to law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies around the world. Well, this got terribly controversial. Walmart pulled it off the shelves. The government of Germany banned it as a potential spy device and even told parents, if you have Kayla the talking doll in your house, destroy it, or at least disable the voice recognition system. So anyway, there are these brokers selling our voices everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge concern. And it's again why we need strong and enforceable laws at the state and federal level. Illinois has this law called the Biometric Information Privacy Act. It's what we have used to great effect to try to curb abuse, companies making abusive use of people's face prints with face recognition technology. But it applies to a whole range of biometrics, including voice print technology. Illinois stands alone right now in the country in having a strong law like that. There are things that people can do by urging their legislators to act to try to lock down this information, to ensure at the very least the companies can only collect it if they tell us about it, provide notice, and they get express consent before they do it. We should know what they're doing, and we should be able to tell them no.
By the way, but forgive my obsession with voice recognition, but for people who are thinking, oh, I shouldn't worry about this because I never had Kayla, the talking doll. Well, the Amazon Halo fitness band, which is apparently very popular. I just looked it up on Amazon.com yesterday. The Amazon Halo fitness band, among other things, monitors your heart rate, your running gait, and it records and analyzes your voice and says whether you're tense or happy, mad, glad, sad, basically.
It's a really good point, and it points to when we talk about face recognition or voice recognition technologies, we are often talking about identifying people. Oh, that is Dave's voice, that is Danny's voice, and then tracking them across, a set of interactions with a company. But there's a set of complementary, technologies that purport to be able to infer things about people's emotional state or their activities or their intent even based on voice or based on face, right? So watching, people's expressions and trying to impute their emotion. By and large, in my understanding, this is total junk science and dangerous junk science. Of course, as humans, over the course of interacting with people, we are able to get a sense of, what people mean by various tones and expressions, but it's not perfect. And my version of a tense, anxious voice may sound very different from someone else's manifestation of a tense, anxious voice. It's also very cultural, right? The volume and speed and sound and tension and timbre, et cetera, of voices in different languages from different cultural traditions can mean very different things, which means there's some real dangerous implications to companies deciding that they can predict things about us or know things about us based on these kind of machine learning guesses.
It's interesting you say that because we talked in a recent episode with two African-American police officers in St. Louis, Missouri, who talked about the kinds of racist behavior they encounter every day. And one of them talked about how when she goes out with white colleagues, let's say to some sort of a domestic disturbance call, she says that she can tell when there are black people in the neighborhood talking. She can tell that they're not angry or hostile. They're just getting, kind of worked up and energized and excited. She said that's the way people talk in our culture. Whereas the white officers interpret that, the hand gestures and the raised voices, as being aggressive behavior by the African-American residents.
That happens in schools a lot.
It happens in schools a lot. And it turns out there are companies that are marketing aggression detectors to schools that try to read people's voices on audio, right? They get installed up on the ceiling, kind of look like a smoke detector, but it's actually a little audio recording. And there are these companies that are marketing this extraordinarily dubious and dangerous technology that purports to be able to send an automated alert to school security or the principal if it detects aggression. What is aggression? Some voice saying something that this software thinks is aggressive. But is that a kid just exclaiming, right? You have the potential now of police being called on kids, and it's going to be overwhelmingly black and brown kids who are just being kids and being voluble in school, and yet now that becomes some sort of automated alert that sends them into the criminal system.
Wow, that's wild. I hadn't heard anything about it. And by the way, I've just quickly Googled this while you've been talking. One of the main companies selling those systems is called LUROE, L-O-U-R-O-E. There's a lot of controversy about it. Listeners should check it out.
Well, the suspension rates for minority kids are much, much higher in schools than for white kids. And a lot of it is that cross-cultural misinterpretation. White teachers or white principals not really tuning in to the way people from different cultures express themselves. So, yeah, it's all adds up to a real danger, especially when you give authority to various institutions based on the flawed technology.
So there's a guy at the University of Pennsylvania named Joseph Turow in the Annenberg School of Communication there. He's written a lot about voice recognition, and he says, if any one of us calls an 800 number, many companies now are using the same sort of voice recognition technology to instantly say what kind of customer we are. First of all, have we shopped there before? Were we difficult to deal with? Were we easy to deal with? Were we quick to buy? Did we keep saying, no, I don't think I want to buy it? And anyway, and that computer, the artificial intelligence, then routes you, and they call it AI routing. It routes you instantly to a customer service specialist who is especially good at dealing with people like you.
Oh boy, I would like to get that kind of customer service representative.
And one brand name company that we all know about that apparently is starting to test these devices is McDonald's. Dave, you've done some reading about it?
From what I've read, McDonald's is trying out a voice recognition system that will identify customers and use it to kind of shortcut ordering systems because they know what you like to eat and so forth. I don't know how it's going to work, but it's a little creepy, frankly. I mean, I don't order the same thing every time I go in.
Well, theoretically, so when you say, hi, how are you today? It'll instantly know that you like that extra drizzle of whatever on your latte. And then presumably that means McDonald's will have all these voice prints that they could then sell to a broker, right?
And we've been told, I think, by anti-scam advisors, when you get one of these calls on the phone, a telemarketing call, don't say things like yes, because they can record that and use it on voice recognition systems to do things that you don't want to have done in your name.
So Nathan Wessler, should we still be able to sleep peacefully at night, or should we be worrying about all this stuff? Voice recognition, geolocation, facial recognition.
We should be very worried. And I think we should channel that worry into doing what we can, like being attentive to what kinds of apps you give access to your location to. There are other technologies that there may be very little we can do about individually, like a company recording your voice in order to extract a voice print when you're just on the phone, or a company, monetizing your location information when you had every reason to think they weren't going to do that. And for that, we need to be talking to our lawmakers and demanding that they pass strong laws that require notice and consent before a company collects our biometric identifiers, laws that lock down the sale of location information without our knowledge and consent, and laws that strictly limit what kinds of access police can get to all of these sensitive types of information. It's in our power to do something about it if our lawmakers act, and we should be demanding that they do.
So Nathan Wessler of the American Civil Liberties Union, thank you very much. This has been illuminating, worrisome, and has given us a really good picture of where we stand at the moment and where we have to go to protect our privacy.
And when I go to McDonald's now, I'm going to write the order on a yellow legal pad. I'm not going to say anything.
Well, they'll analyze your handwriting.
Nate, thank you so much.
Yes,
thank you.
Very
It's
much.
delightful to talk.
And that's it for this episode of Two Reporters.
You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, or pretty much any leading podcast site. And we hope you'll check out more of our work at tworeporters.org. I'll repeat that, tworeporters.org or tworeporters.net. I'm David Tripler.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Please join us again soon for another episode of Two Reporters. Bye-bye.